Why is it? Oh, I ran off at the wrong time. Hey, y'all. State Representative Erin Zwiener here. Thank y'all so much for joining us this evening. Election Day is barreling down on us. We are going to have results in, I think it's 25 days, which feels both like forever and like tomorrow. So I really want to thank y'all for joining us tonight. We're going into the final push. So we're going to be doing a roundtable about about labor issues tonight. And I want y'all to keep in mind that we at the campaign can still use your time. So please consider volunteering. We're going to have a big weekend lit drop blitz. Tomorrow we will be in both Buda and San Marcos. And on Sunday we will be in Kyle. And on Monday for the holiday, we will be in Dripping Springs, which is actually one of our guests' hometowns. So without any further ado, I want to introduce my guests. We've got Tyler Sheldon from Texas State Employee Union and Dina Donaldson from Texas AFT. Tyler, you want to start out by introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Representative Zwiener. My name is Tyler Sheldon. I'm the Legislative and Political Director for the Texas State Employees Union. So we represent state employees in agencies and universities across the state. As the representative pointed out, I was born and raised in beautiful Dripping Springs, went all the way through from kindergarten to graduation at Dripping Springs High School. My parents still live out there, and so I still seen driving down 290 and off into the country to visit my parents occasionally. So I don't know if you want me to expand any more than that. If not, I'll let Texas AFT Dina introduce herself.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you very much, Representative Zwiener, for the invitation to be here tonight. I have the great honor of being the House lobbyist for Texas AFT and getting to kind of represent the issues for our retirees and active employees for public schools across the state. So I am looking forward to this conversation, to all the work that's going to be going on for the next few months and session.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to have both of y'all here tonight. And I want to remind you, Tyler, you're welcome back in House District 45 anytime. Definitely anybody who votes with labor is welcome here consistently.
I may very well be back in your district before too long.
I hope so. Need every vote we can get, but you're a little late for this cycle. Yeah. So, we're going to talk about a bunch of issues tonight. And, I want to note this has been a really tough time for workers. A lot of workers have had to make some pretty difficult choices about how to proceed. A lot of folks worrying about their safety in the workplace, but still needing to make sure to put food on the table. Struggles with the Texas safety net having a lot of holes in it that we need to fix in the future. So it's been a tough time, but I've been really grateful for places where workers have stood together and really been able to ask their workplace to do a little bit better. So we're going to be talking about a lot of issues tonight, but I think one of the first things we're going to talk about is some of the protections our educators and our state employees have really fought for over time, and whether or not Texas is living up to the commitments we've made to those public employees. So let's talk about the TRS and ERS pensions. What are they? Which state employees get which, and what's the difference between them? Whichever one of y'all wants to take it.
So that's a pretty big question. So ERS is the employee retirement system. I'll kind of do a brief synopsis of that, and I'll throw TRS over to Dina. But ERS is the pension fund that covers a large majority of state employees. Everybody from CPS workers, parole officers, correctional officers, state supported living centers, state hospitals, Health and Human Services, everybody that works for the state, except for university employees, are covered under ERS. So what ERS is it's our public sector pension for state employees. It provides not only a secure retirement for those that dedicate their lives to public service and working for the citizens of Texas, but it also covers their health care as a active employee, as well as as a retiree. So it's incredibly important all the way around to our state employees. It's what, especially once you retire, it's your lifeline. It's what comes to you on top of Social Security in order to provide that ability to now dedicate the rest of your life to caring for your grandchildren, living your life knowing that you will have some deferred compensation from the state coming your way. It's really a great program that we do provide our employees. It's one of the reasons that historically we've been able to maintain a solid workforce of the state. It's because the pay is not always that great compared to the private sector, but the benefits in retirement has kept the state competitive. At least that was the case historically. Over the last couple of decades, the funding levels just haven't been keeping up with the pension, and we're in desperate need to increase that funding. State retirees haven't seen a increase to their pension since 2001. So a state retiree that retired in 2001 is still receiving exactly the same pension check that they did when they retired in 2001, despite the increase in the cost that we've seen, especially in House District 45 and the Austin area that your district's so close to. We've seen the cost go up dramatically in the last 20 years since 2001. But if somebody retired back then, they are now finding it harder and harder to live off of their pension at retirement. So we need to make sure and keep an eye on that, because they still need our protection and our support. They have earned this. This is not something that is a handout in any way. This is just deferred compensation that was promised when they signed on to the state. So it's something that we need to do our best. And the legislature has looked into ERS considerably. That's one of their charges during the interim, is to look at the funding for ERS. But as we know, everything's been pretty crazy with COVID. So the interim charges haven't been discussed as much, at least in a public forum, as they typically would at this time of the year. But we'll see with where we can get some additional funding from within the budget. It's going to be a tough budget cycle, as we hear every year, but with COVID, it's going to be even tougher to find that money. But in the last legislative session, the House side at least attempted to find a way to at least add a little bit of funding to ERS. In their version of the budget, they had a $150 million increase contribution to ERS, which is essentially the equivalent of 2% of payroll on there. It wouldn't have completely brought ERS back to actuary soundness, but it would have been a step in the right direction. However, the Senate side stripped it out at the very last minute, despite protests from both the Speaker and the Chair of Appropriations on the House side. The Senate did strip that, so there was not any increase on the in the budget for ERS last session. And on top of that, the ERS board lowered the expected rate of return during this last year, which, I mean, I could keep going on that, because the expected rate of return on ERS is the stock market, what they expect to get from the pension, because there are billions of dollars invested that help to pay for these benefits. And the more money that's invested, the more money that we can return. However, just over the last couple of decades, we've had some historic downturns in the market that has led to some underfunding on that. But we hope that if the legislature can get it back on track this next session, that we'll be on the path to not only having actuary sound, but being able to give that much needed cost of living adjustment to state retirees that I mentioned earlier that they've been going without since 2001. I'll answer more questions on that. Meant to do just a kind of a brief, but ERS just has so many facets. And Dina, unless Representative Zwiener, do you want to ask some questions on ERS before we pass over to TRS?
Well, I just want to make sure we have something clear here. You said ERS recipients have not had a cost of living increase.
That is correct.
Since 2001. Has it gotten more expensive to live?
Tremendously, especially in areas such as Austin, where a large majority of state employees live close to or surrounding Austin.
Yeah, no, I know we've got a lot of state employees, retired state employees in House District 45.
Just to kind of put it into perspective, that's more pay talk, but just from inflation for state employee pay, if we, in order to get even, I think what's the percentage, just to get even close to the buying power state employees had in the 80s and have the same ability to buy a loaf of bread or rent and stuff would require about a $15,000 across the board raise for everybody in order to get back to the buying power. So that's similar to with retirees. The cost of living has gone up to quite a bit.
Thank you. Dina, TRS, is there a similar story?
Oh, yes. Let me unpack. So with TRS, it is specifically the public pension system that covers our public school employees when they retire. It also provides health insurance for a lot of our active and retired public school employees as well. Now, I will say that we are very lucky in some regards that, because the system itself is quite large, even when stacked up against other, national pension systems. It's got 158 billion in assets or so. And we have been able to see that it's diversified and that it's been relatively stable throughout the COVID-19 crisis. And so we're doing a little bit better than what one might imagine. But really, like Tyler said, like our pensions for our members, it's their lifelines. It's kind of what they have to rely on. And particularly so because with our folks, most of them don't get any sort of Social Security. So they really, they need their pension to do everything for them. And we got fortunate last session. A lot of the reasons why we are kind of in a healthier spot this go round is because the legislature did invest money into TRS and did, create a schedule where it was going to increase its contributions to the funds over the next 5 years. And so that has really kind of got us to a place where, man, I think for the first time, and I do not know the exact year on this, but the first time in an awfully long time, our pension fund is actuarially sound enough to actually qualify to even start having the conversations around having a cost of living adjustment, for example, which, previously those were not even things that we could consider. And that is something, as you all noted, like surprise, surprise, it costs more to live these days than maybe it did, 10, 20 years ago. And many of our, retirees have not seen an increase in what they get to bring in well over a decade as well. So their buying power has effectively gone down. I think on average, the retiree might bring in about $2,000 a month. By the time you take out things like rent or mortgage, insurance, food, all the things that, the little things that we need to get by, there's just not a lot left over, particularly if you live in a place like Austin that's kind of expensive. And so one of the things that we had been really looking forward to doing was figuring out what the conversation would be and kind of pushing for, a cost of living increase to be a part of the funding formula going forward. Obviously, some of those talks are now kind of having to be on hold because of just the reality of the budget, but we feel like they shouldn't completely go away. Like we really know that they're going to be important for the future and something that we need to keep in mind. The fact that the 13th check the retirees also got last time around was, very helpful and we are very thankful to it, but it in no way is a permanent fix to the problem, and it doesn't make up for inflation. So we need to come up with some better solutions. And I know, right now, like I said, TRS is doing all right. It is stable, but we have also been seeing where we're having to rely more and more on things like alternative investments to help make up the difference in our funding. Like if you look at since, the mid 90s, where alternative investments were only about 5% of what our portfolio is, now it's about 20%. And while that's not off the charts, like the reality is that also means that, we're having to take greater risk in order to try to bring in the higher returns we need to meet our obligations. And a lot of that is a direct result of the state not actually putting in more money during that time and kind of keeping its contribution flat. So this is something that, we're hoping that the state sees the value and continuing to support and to fund and kind of keeping its commitments from last time around, so that, we don't have to assume so much risk in order to do the bare minimums for our folks.
So I want to make sure we emphasize this. Tyler, you said it's been since 2001 since ERS recipients got a cost of increase. Dina, how long has it been for TRS recipients?
Actually, since about the same amount of time. So I think 2001 there was a bump. I would want to double check that though, Rep, to make sure there wasn't something that happened, a little increase that happened since then. But I know that for many of our retirees, they're looking at well over a decade. So I don't want to misspeak.
Okay. But it's been a while. It's been over a
time. I mean, think of what has changed in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of like cost. So the reality is if you're not adjusting for that year to year, then you're going to start seeing your buying power go down for folks.
Yeah, I know I've met quite a few retired educators who aren't all the way retired, who have other jobs on the side. I'm really glad we were able to do the 13th check last session. I think that was important, but I think it's important to note that was capped at $2,000 per recipient. So folks who did earn a higher pension still just got max an extra $2,000. And a lot of folks had a pension that was below that, especially if they had retired a couple decades ago. So thank y'all for talking about both of this. Is there anything y'all want to add to the pension conversation before we move on to our next topic?
I would just add that it's so important that we recognize the value of our pensions as a state. The fact is that our pensions are really our economic drivers in a lot of ways. Like they provide support to, our retirees who otherwise would be maybe needing to access other types of state support to help them get by right now. Like during this crisis, they've had a steady paycheck at least coming in, even if it's not what we would want it to be. It's been enough to kind of help keep them going and keep them afloat, which means they're also able to then contribute those dollars back into the economy locally. And so this is something that our pensions have been able to do. And this is kind of an important resource that the state has, is that this money stays in Texas, and it gets predominantly spent locally. So.
And I'm actually sorry, I meant to ask another question and I jumped ahead, but what impact does us struggling to do these cost of living increases and fully fund these pensions, what effect does that have on our ability to recruit and keep teachers and state employees?
That's where I was actually going to go with my next comment. I was going to go that direction. So what Dina said was definitely important. That it is a economic driver. That it does help stimulate the economy and put buying power into those retirees' hands. But as you mentioned with that question, it is also an amazing recruiting tool. I mentioned briefly when I was talking about it earlier, but it is really what allows us to remain competitive against the private sector when we're recruiting people out of college that may really have a desire to work with the public and provide that public service that being a state employee and being a teacher really gives to our citizens. But they may be offered more money from the private sector. So in order to really push them towards this path, that we have to offer additional incentives. And one of those is the ERS and TRS pensions, being able to have that secure retirement that you'd be able to rely on and be able to retire and spend time with your grandchildren, maybe travel, do stuff that you want to when you're still young enough to do it, be able to get out of the race, working for the state being a teacher and know that you're going to be secure. So that recruiting tool is really diminished when we do have news stories or press or teachers or retirees saying, "Hey, I'm barely surviving on my retirement check," to their children or the grandchildren that may be considering taking that path. And they see that package, but they're seeing their somebody that retired in 2001 that is working an extra job now because they had to go back to work because their rent or utilities went up, and they want to stay at their house, and so they're working a second job, and that's not what they pictured when they decided that the pension was a draw. So with the state, we currently have the highest turnover that we've ever had since they started recording it back in the 90s. We're at about 19.3% turnover in like statewide. So for many of you, you know how expensive turnover can be, and a lot of that is that state employees start working. They see that the promise for the retirement might not be there, that the pension when they retire, that there's the scare that if it is there, the benefits might be cut, and that they might not receive the pension that they were promised. So when they do get another job offer, they go somewhere else. So then we really lose that institutional knowledge that we rely so heavily on of employees that have worked for 20 or 30 years for the state or as a teacher that are able to really do their job effectively and efficiently and take care of those citizens that they're serving here in the state. So we really need to have that strong pension there in order to really draw young people that are starting their career and really want to retire when they're 50 or 60 years old and not just rely on Social Security and or a 401k. I mean, all of that you can have as an additional backstop, but having that pension is something that they can really feasibly dream of when they start their career. That, hey, when I work for 20 years, I'll be able to retire, and I won't have to work a job after that. I'll just be able to enjoy the rest of my life, which is what the dream is and the goal.
I think Tyler really covered that pretty well, and that you can go into education like you're not going to exactly be raking in the dough. So having something like a strong pension system that you're at least going to have security when you retire, like something that you can look forward to, live off of, and know it's going to be there for you and it's going to be stable, I think is a huge benefit for getting folks to come into the field. And I think that unfortunately, as we've seen so many other kind of incentives around getting people to want to be educators kind of get whittled away, and it becoming harder and harder to really attract young folks into wanting to be educators, that's something that we need to be able to fall back on, is something that we need to be able to protect and to make sure that it's going to be there for generations to come. It's kind of a promise that we've made to all of these workers as a state, that they're going to have this there, that this is something that they don't need to worry about, and that it was okay if they took a lower paying gig, making sure that they were teaching our, state's youth. And we were going to take care of them for doing that. So, I mean, absolutely, it makes a difference. Oh, you're muted.
Thank y'all for explaining that. I know we really want to have great folks doing the work. Tyler, one thing you said reminded me of a stat I've heard, which is that the agency that has the highest turnover of staff is the Department of Family and Protective Services, which is an agency where we really want experienced people there taking care of some of our most vulnerable children. But it doesn't pay very well. It's very emotional, draining work. And then because it's underfunded, we don't have enough people, so everyone has too high of caseloads, and we've lost a lot of good staff that way. I think it's really important to think about what the costs are of not doing right by our employees at the state level, because there are, we can talk, it is of course the right thing to do right by our workers, but it's also the right thing for the whole state of Texas. And not doing that affects our ability to be efficient and do things like respond to pandemics and take care of children in the foster care system. So I really hope we can do better in the future, and I look forward to working with y'all on that next session.
Definitely.
Let's ask another question. I'm guessing this is going mostly to you, Tyler. But let's talk about how universities work. Texas State University is in my district. There's of course lots of state universities in the surrounding areas. How do the Board of Regents work in determining a university's funds, and why do they exist? Is the amount of power they have right? Should the legislature be having more conversations about this?
So, I mean, that could be a whole nother, I mean, all these topics can take like days and days to discuss really the inner workings, but just some of the history on that to kind of tie it in is back before 2003, the legislature did have control over the university budget and at least state universities. The legislature controlled things like tuition and pay raises and staffing, and had a lot more of a hands-on approach when it came to the public universities. They were treated a lot more like state employees than they are now. In 2003, the legislature did what was called tuition deregulation, and kind of handed the reins of tuition and spending over to the Board of Regents and the individual universities. Just because, as we see now as well, the funding levels that were affecting the tuition costs, and rather than waiting every 2 years to be able to adjust those numbers and allocate more money to the universities with influxes in enrollments and such, the universities really pushed, and with the guidance of the House, they were able to deregulate the tuition in the hopes that if they needed to raise more money to hire more staff in order to handle more enrollments at the universities, they needed to give a pay raise. They could do it by raising the tuitions. However, as I know, a lot of your members with Texas State University in your district know, tuition has skyrocketed since 2003 when the legislature handed those reins over. They've skyrocketed, and the pay raises and staffing levels, just like other state agencies, continue to remain stagnant. And worse yet, the state employees at these public universities, when there is, that's a whole nother conversation because it rarely happens, but when there is now a across the board pay raise for all state employees, those university employees that work at the public universities are left out of those pay raises because they're taken care of individually on a campus by campus basis by the Board of Regents. And I know that the legislature has begun to have the conversation just because so many constituents and families are having more and more difficulty paying for college tuition, and it's becoming more and more in demand. But as we know, the student loan student loans are a whole nother crisis that we're hitting nationwide, the ability to pay those back. And just because we're able to get those loans doesn't mean that the university should be able to charge higher tuitions every single year. So that's kind of the conversation that a lot of people have been having is why does the tuition raise so much, so dramatically since 2003? When we see basic things such as the pay of the staff at universities and their benefits and such still remain stagnant, even with the dramatic increase of the funding for the universities. That money doesn't go to the employees and continues to go more and more on the backs of the students. So it's definitely something that we've been looking into since a lot of our members do work for public universities across the state. We want to make sure that the grad students that do become paid staff at the university, the adjunct professors, the maintenance and crew members within the facilities are all paid adequately, and receive pay raises and secure pensions and benefits from those increases in tuition. And if the border regions aren't able to do that, then we might need to look into bringing back some of that control to the legislature, just so that there are elected officials representing their constituents, providing that oversight on where that money goes from the tuition. So it is kind of a issue that's very complex, and will hopefully be discussed in public hearings over the next session.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I know a concern I've heard. I know that I've heard from a lot of folks that there's concern because the state legislature has cut funding for higher education and sort of forced the region's hand in some cases. But now, because we're not setting the tuition, we're not setting the salaries, we don't have the same accountability for it at the body. So I know that's a concern I share. I want to make sure that our constituents have access to us and can influence us, and it is way easier to influence elected officials than an appointed body.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, because Tyler did an amazing job of laying out the history there, is that with this issue, kind of as you said, it seems like every time the state has a financial crisis, higher education gets kind of hit with a cut. I mean, that's sort of has become the norm. You look at 2003, 2011, this is what happened. And it, and leading to the deregulation with the tuition, like what we have seen then is the sort of exasperating the issues around access and equity when it comes to students being able to actually attend our universities, and, as well as creating problems for employees. And so I think this is something that for Texas AFT, like we're certainly in favor of having the legislature kind of take back control of some of that to actually look at how the funding is being used and regulating it. But it is also a little bit of a case of trying to put like the toothpaste back in the tube. At this point, it's going to be a very complex and difficult process to do, because reality is it will cost. If the state kind of does take on wanting to regulate tuition again, like they're going to have to be willing to pay their fair share. Otherwise, it's going to, again, put our universities in a really hard spot. And so it is a very complex issue, but something that does need to be addressed.
Yeah, thank y'all for discussing this. I know there's a lot of conversation about how we're going to have a rough budget year next session. Mm-hmm. And some folks have said things like, oh, we just need to do what we did in 2011 and cut the budget really intensely. But I think the thing that we have to keep in mind when we have those conversations is austerity measures are people's jobs. And austerity measures are people's ability to go to college. Austerity measures are our ability to help provide health care to children in this state. It's our ability to fund public schools. And that's something I'm going to keep in mind next session, and make sure that we fight to keep our spending as stable as possible, so that we keep some of that consistency in the state. That's why we have an economic stabilization fund in Texas. We've got $8.8 billion in it. And that money is there to help us ride out economic hard times without having a dramatic impact on the services the state is able to offer. So, and I think it's important for us to look back and remember the costs we've had in previous times that we've done dramatic budget cuts. So let's talk about some of the shift between Texas and the public sector and the private sector. Texas' public sector has shrunk, and we have a larger private sector now. What does that mean for Texas workers? What does that mean for Texans and how our government works?
So I think one big example that's very fresh on everybody's mind and unfortunately has impacted a lot of people, we saw from the response with the coronavirus and the need to shut down many of our businesses across the state for a very extended period of time, that a lot of workers then had to rely, probably for many of them for the first time, on our state employees and our Texas Workforce Commission in particular, which over the last couple of decades is one of the agencies that has been the most impacted by privatization. Most of TWC is no longer directly handled by state employees. A lot of it's handled by private independent contractors. And when we really needed that influx to get our unemployed Texans the relief that they so desperately needed in order to keep afloat. We saw the inability for the private companies running TWC to be able to handle that influx. There was an article in the Statesman from a whistleblower within TWC just a couple days ago talking about their inability to really respond, and it's just really the lack of oversight that a state agency should have, and the ability to adapt to a situation like this by hiring more individuals and really having the guidance of the state leadership to be able to plug any holes that might appear. But when it's all rolled out into the private sector, there's just a lot of a blame game where they have subcontractors that subcontract something else, and when something falls out, who really holds the bag? We saw this also has been occurring with some trial programs to privatize, as you mentioned earlier, Family and Protective Services. They've been trying to find ways to cut the costs on that agency, unfortunately, even though it's something so important to take care of the children of our state. We're still finding ways to save money, and one of those ways is to privatize a lot of those services that Family and Protective Services provide. So there's been different areas that have began to be the test cases for privatization around the state. And I know that over in El Paso, I believe it's District 10 for Family Protective Services, back in the 2015 session, maybe it was 2017, they did a pilot program for family-based safety services and began that rollout in El Paso. And just over the summer, they had done the transition. They had laid off the state employees. They had encouraged them to find jobs that didn't have the pensions and benefits in the private sector to go and work for these private companies. And just this summer, the state has now had to pull that back within their fold because the contractors weren't able to uphold their promises within their contract. So they've yanked the contract and pulled it back to the state without having those employees remaining in the state to be able to handle those kind of caseloads. So it really provides a lot more costs overall when you have these failed pilot programs that continue to be the history of privatization within Texas. Is over and over again we try and privatize, and over again we end up rolling those services back to an enormous cost for taxpayers when we have to completely double the work, rehire and retrain immediately, and still owe the contractors large portions of money for a failed job that didn't actually care for the children and services that we had attempted to save money by utilizing private contractors. So it's just something that if we really cared about the services, we would fully fund the agency rather than trying to fully fund private companies. The state can definitely do the job, especially when it's things such as caring for children that should not be a for-profit business. It should be for the safety and security of the children and those at-risk populations that state employees serve. It should not be something that a stockholder should be able to make money and a CEO be able to get rich off of. State employees that aren't doing it to get rich, but they still need to be adequately paid in order to hire the staff needed to do the job and reach the pay levels that will keep state employees there that are highly qualified and eager to do the work. They really care about the populations and want to do the work. We just need to focus more on funding the agencies as they are instead of trying to roll it out to a private company that, like I said, gets rid of the ability for the oversight that the state really desperately needs to maintain on a lot of this stuff because it's just, we've seen with the Department of Family Protective Services, Texas is, I believe it's 2 or 3 times now been held for contempt of court on court orders dealing with our children due to the fact that they just pass the blame to somebody else, and the judge just sees right through that.
Yeah, thank you for that specific example, Tyler. You might not know this about me, but when I was still in college in Montana, I worked for a contractor for Montana's Family and Protective Services. They probably have a different acronym than Texas, but I worked for a contractor in a group home for teenage boys. Now it's probably mostly kids who would end up in treatment foster care, but it was before that. It was in the new days of that model. And I made $9 an hour, and I was undertrained. I think I did an okay job, mostly because of some of my other life experiences, but I watched staff make big mistakes. I watched us all really not have enough training to always keep ourselves and the children in our charge safe. And I watched this incredibly high rate of employee turnover, including myself. I was only there 3 months. It didn't pay me enough for it to be a job that I made my vocation at the time. And that we sort of get sold this story that the private sector has some magic sauce that's going to make everything more efficient and better. But that's not always the case. And we have to look really closely at when it makes sense to have profit involved and when it doesn't. So I appreciate you bringing that example up. I have some direct experience in seeing that outsourcing our child protective work doesn't necessarily make it better. And in fact, can make it more vulnerable and have a situation where you have less experienced employees and a lot more turnover. So, Dina, do you want to talk about privatization on the education side?
Oh boy, do I. So I think for us, really, like where you can see this example is really the push to expand charters across the state. And I mean, right now we have a situation where we spend $3.1 billion, that's billion with a B, the taxpayer dollars on subsidizing completely charter schools. And that is true even though those charters are not held to any of the same accountability standards that our public schools are, and despite the fact that they serve less than 6% of the total students in the state of Texas. So when you think about that amount of money, like that's a problem any year, I would say, but in a year where we know there's so much need in our schools right now, whenever we are looking at campuses who are struggling, we need more counselors, we need more nurses, we need more supplies, resources, all of these things. Like 3.1 billion could do a whole lot to actually solve some of the issues we are seeing around what our campuses are requiring to have safe schools and to have well-supported students and families in those schools. And right now, like they're going to fund private operations essentially. And whenever I think you see a situation where, you have a charter that can afford to basically, own their own private jet to like fly their executives around, you kind of have to question whether or not they really need those state dollars. And if they can maybe be used in a better way. So that's something that we're really pushing for, to looking at having a moratorium on the expansion, because right now it is very unclear in terms of the damage being done by the fact that we're siphoning all of these dollars away from our traditional public schools.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dina. It seems like we as a state are not clear why we want charters and what for. And it seems like there's a lot of different opinions on that. I know, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree that it's interesting, the debate, but I think you kind of touched on it. There's still this idea, whether you're talking about, privatizing the public sector, workers are privatizing our public schools. There's this idea that I think has been sold to the public that the private sector somehow has better answers or some magical solution or, like a magic bullet that they're going to bring in to solve the problems. And really what we found is the data doesn't actually show that. Like it doesn't shake out to be that. Like for instance, charters really do not outperform, their public school counterparts, despite having, additional resources that come into them. So it's just, I think, a little bit of being sold a bill of goods around what they're able to offer.
Yeah, no, I know it's interesting for me because I know some charters that I think do some really good work. I mean, we've got a local charter school, the Catherine Ann Porter School, that ends up really serving as a place for a lot of students who quite frankly experience a lot of bullying in the local school district, and it's sort of arrived as this safer space in the community. And I have a good friend who works in a charter school that is specifically for recovering alcoholic teens. And like, those are niches I understand. What I struggle to understand is when we see charter schools essentially creating shadow networks of our ISD schools and directly competing with them. And when I think about the original reasons, put forward for charter schools, one was to serve niche populations. One was to serve like specific student communities that have very unique needs in places that have enough concentration to merit it. And then the other reason was to sort of conduct experiments in education and figure out new good ideas that we could bring into our ISD schools. And it seems like at some point we forgot that entire step of taking those lessons and bringing them in, and instead just started letting these chains of schools pop up.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think we've moved a long way from whatever the original intentions were around having charters come in to where now what we see, it is charters being brought in and like setting up shop right across the street from a wonderful neighborhood school, that is actually serving its community and doing well. And we see them, really not being held to any of the same measures in terms of the student population that they're serving, or in terms of like the accountability metrics that they have to meet. And, I think with that too, like this idea that innovation kind of has to happen like in a setting outside of the traditional public school system. I think we have recently, like over the last 10, 20 years, like there's actually been data coming in that actually shows there are models that allow us to get the same kinds of, flexibility, innovation within our own school system. Things like the community schools model, for example, which is very flexible, and it engages parents and stakeholders. It has a very kind of bottom up inclusive, like allowing everybody to come in and be part of the process with identifying the needs for the schools. And you see that they can look very different, depending on what the resources and needs and the situation is for those schools. Like those have had great success in implementing different types of strategies to address concerns within the communities and and for their student bodies. And those are something that can be implemented right within our own traditional school system without having to go outside of, our current process. So I just think that, there's this idea that I think is still held over about what charters were maybe originally able to do or should have been doing. We have come so far past that now from what they're actually doing in the state and what we see like the bulk of them. Like, I'm not saying there's, you have some of these, one or two offs here where they can show that they've made, some interesting gains or they're serving a unique population, but like the vast majority of charter schools really are in place to compete with our public schools. And they don't have to play by any of the same rules. And yet they get our state funding. So I think that's where, we need to be taking a really hard look at what the long-term impact that is going to be on public education in the state. And what that's going to mean for our, our school children who are maybe in areas that, are already underfunded and needing more supports, so just, that's something that I feel like we're going to have to address going forward, with the legislature in terms of like, what do we actually want for our schools? What does public education want?
And I want to note, the really beautiful thing about our ISD schools is they are there to educate every single student. They are there to provide that service to everybody. And that's really critical. And however we move forward, we have to make sure we're not leaving any students behind. Which is definitely one of the concerns with sort of how the conversation is and the effects on the ground are shaping up with the proliferation of charters.
Absolutely.
Well, another question that I think has been a little bit of an issue for teachers recently and other educators. The way COVID-19 has developed in the state of Texas has exposed a dire need for increased worker safety measures in the workplace. What have y'all identify as being the biggest needs to address regarding worker safety? And honestly, solutions that'll both address long-term issues as well as the immediate crisis.
So right now, kind of the last numbers I really saw was we've had over 4,500 students, teachers, and school support staff test positive for COVID-19 in the state. And that estimate is probably low, right, because of the way the reporting is being handled. Through our own kind of reaching out to our locals and kind of getting feedback, as well as through our COVID-19 tracker that we kind of developed on our site, where people can actually not just put in positive cases, but also report issues around implementation for protocols, but having access to personal protection type equipment. We've also kind of uncovered that what has been coming up more than anything is that there has been poor communication between, employees and administrators and the districts, and sometimes even with parents. So that often, you have a situation where teachers are walking in, for say, not really knowing what to expect, not knowing where to go if they see a problem or how that problem will be handled, where really it's just they're left wondering so much in terms of what their day is going to look like. What are they going to be doing with their students? Like the fact that they're being asked to do, a lot of times cleaning themselves between classes, which is something they're willing to do, but many of them haven't necessarily been trained on that, on how to do it effectively. We've also seen, in places where, like, next thing is that while there's supposed to be, some personal protection type equipment in place, not everybody has actually gotten everything that they were supposed to, or those resources didn't last nearly as long as they were supposed to. I think with TEA's distribution of like the masks and the supplies that they were putting out, those were supposed to go 2 months, and a lot of places those aren't lasting 2 weeks. So again, now we have educators and support staff going out and buying supplies out of their own pockets to try to make up the difference. And then on top of that, even where you have safety protocols from the district that are supposed to be there to provide added support and protection, like the implementation around those things have been just really inconsistent. And, and that goes back up to the fact that, the guidance from the state itself has been, very vague and not, kind of really leaving it up to the districts to figure things out on their own. And unfortunately, that means that you do not see any sort of a standardized response, even within the same district, sometimes from campus to campus. And again, like, you can have the best safety plan in the world, but if it is not actually being put into practice, it's not going to be very effective. And I think that those are kind of like the three main areas that have just created an environment that is just unhealthy and has really, created a lot of anxiety for educators who, want to be there for their students, who want to teach, who want to go back if it's safe. That it's hard to feel safe if, that when you're watching somebody like not wearing a mask and nothing is happening about it, or that you don't have enough of the supplies you need to be able to, properly clean the area, or you're not really getting up-to-date information around what, the positive cases are for your campus. It just creates a lot of anxiety around that. So I think those are some of the issues that can and need to be dealt with, and something that, the state could have done a much better job with helping to give districts more guidelines around. I think it's funny that all of the guidance around safety has been very, very loose, left up to local control, but yet the guidance around when to go back to school and what that has to look like and what you need to do has been extremely detailed and not very flexible. So, we have a situation where, TEA is micromanaging on one end, but yet kind of like stepping back on the other. And it has put our schools into a hard position. I think in our position where a lot of them maybe want to prioritize safety, but they're also really worried about the threat of losing their funding if they don't follow what TEA wants them to do around reopening. And because TEA's reopening measures are not tied to any sort of science around, what the positive rates are, what the community transmission rates are, like, it's really an arbitrary timeline that TEA has set, even with its waivers, that, they are often doing the best they can, but who knows what it's going to look like, 4 weeks, 8 weeks into whenever those waivers are up, and they're still expected to be opened in those cases. And as an educator, we just have very few options at this point to be able to push back on that with current state law. So I think that's something that we could look at more going forward. You have other states, for example, Florida, just the teachers union there just won a lawsuit about the emergency reopening plan. Because in their state's constitution, though, they have language that kind of stipulates safety is one of the fundamental things that has to be taken into account for operating schools. And while I think a lot of people maybe think of safety in terms of looking at threat assessments or dealing with, school shootings, environmental safety also factors into that as a part of safety. And so they were able to argue that the emergency reopening plan did not account for the safety that needed to be in place for schools. In Texas, we don't have anything like that right now in our current law to help us out. And that's something that we can look at changing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dina. Timing on that. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And, something I heard, I've heard a lot of fear from teachers and sort of this uncertainty about how things are going to move forward. And I've also heard from school board members just a lot of frustration that they are very aware that they are not public health professionals and feeling like they were asked to be without getting a lot of support. My office did formally request from TEA, Texas Education Agency, that they invest in some public health resources to help connect school districts to planning resources. Because, you're right, that we had on this one end with TEA micromanaging and on this other end going, you got this figured out, local control. And school districts were mostly going, well, we want some flexibility over here, but we want you to help us do this here. Like what are our criteria? Which safety measures get us the biggest bang for our buck and are most effective? And there was just so little guidance, and they've really been having to make it up as they go along. And I really do believe that all of our school boards and our administrators and our educators are doing the best they know how to do. But we should have been offering them a lot more support at the state level. We should have been offering them a lot more support. And, it just hasn't been there. And then another thing I'll mention is, the federal government gave Texas $1.3 billion for schools. And I was on the call when our education commissioner, Mike Morath, told superintendents that don't worry about your spending. We got you. Spend whatever you need to. And then this federal aid money comes down and the state sops it back up to try and address budget shortfalls instead of giving it to schools. And so I think we have some broken trust between our superintendents and TEA as well, and not a lot of confidence that if they spend money on safety, there'll be reimbursement there for them. So they want to do the right thing, but they're being put in a box in a pretty big way.
Absolutely. No, I think they, unfortunately, like right now, there have been opportunities where I think the state, if you really wanted to reopen schools, there are ways of going about it that could have ensured safety, had people feel confident, that was really tying things to the CDC recommendations and those guidelines. I'm looking how do we best support those things? And then how do we maybe even expand and work on expanding our access to, internet and technology and things to ensure that there were backups someplace. All of these things that we could have been really focusing on and making better, we did not. We kind of shied away from because there was not clear leadership from the top about what they should be doing, how they should be doing, that they would have the support in place if they said, come mid-October, we're still a hot spot. We can't go full in person right now. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. It's just not how it works.
Well, and the saying is, you hope for the best and you prepare for the worst. The state hoped for the best and they prepared for the best. And For a little while, I mean, the trajectory looked good. I mean, April and May in Texas looked pretty reasonable. And then in June is when our case count started to climb. And by the time we were in a big spike, it was July, and there just wasn't a lot of time left for our schools to plan. And that really is a state level failure for TEA to not get some of those tools together and ready for the districts to be able to do virtual learning as successfully as possible, and to reopen doors as safely as possible. Tyler, have you seen that lack of preparation impact other state employees?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, when Dina was talking, I mean, a lot of the issues that she talked about, just the lack of transparency and communication and not having any guidance statewide really led to a lot of the issues. I mean, many of our state employees deal with a lot of the most vulnerable citizens of our state. So they're not able to work from home or take a lot of the precautions, especially at the beginning when they weren't given the necessary lead time or direction to implement some of this stuff. So one thing that we saw a lot of was at the state supported living centers. We saw a lot of miscommunication and misdirection from the facilities, just because a lot of them didn't have any policies in place for something like this, and they weren't getting anything put down quickly for them. So a lot of their first response was just to hide it from the public. And we had some facilities that were hearing rumors that the other side of the facility had a couple COVID cases and an outbreak. And they'd raise concerns and be told, no, there's nothing to be worried about. There's also actually even signs on that side of campus saying there's nothing to be worried about. And then the news breaks, and that other side has had a outbreak that's out of control, and now the whole facility is on the evening news with an outbreak, talking about what's going on. And we also have the instances with workers such as parole officers and, like we mentioned, DFPS. That have to go into homes even if there are COVID cases. Like, they still have their jobs to do. They have to go in and check on the vulnerable children or the inmate and make the checks, even if it's a COVID positive home. There's still the rules that must be taken care of. So we had a lot of push and brought in legislators across the state. Because there were, especially at the beginning, and we're still running into it, even months and months into this, where there just wasn't the adequate precautions and PPE available for the employees. And if they were in a vulnerable class or were taking care of maybe a mother or a child that is predisposed or has pre-existing conditions that could be fatal if COVID was contracted, those were still being put into danger, having to be on a COVID positive home at a state supported living center, or not having the coverage to be able to let them take the necessary steps that they felt safe. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of good state employees that have left employment because they didn't feel safe during this crisis. And I think now we've had a lot of talks with commissioners and the leadership of the state, and we've been able to take care of a lot of these concerns, but we're still nowhere close to prepared the way that we should be in order to make sure that our employees feel safe at their jobs, which they really should. On this, it is our responsibility. I know that this really caught everybody by surprise, but just like what Dina was saying, a lot of it was could have been fixed with clear direction from the top, like just being able to set policies and enforce them statewide instead of there being a patchwork of different policies at different facilities that really led to a lot of confusion and unsafe conditions. We also feel like we really need to show our gratitude towards our public servants and increase their pay during this with hazard duty pay. Really show that we have their backs. I know a lot of private sector did pay raises throughout this crisis, just because the risk is real, and the risk is a lot higher than it has been at any time during their jobs. And we really need to make sure that they know that we're doing everything that we possibly can. We need to show them the support that they give so many students and citizens across the state.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Tyler. I'm really sorry to hear about all the inconsistencies statewide. I know it's been a major issue. And again, I think we come back to that question of sort of Texas being this weird mix of micromanaging and decentralized in ways that cause a lot of havoc and don't always make sense. I really hope we can do better for both our state employees and our teachers next session. I know a lot of folks have been carrying the weight of this crisis throughout, and often without the tools they really deserve to have along the way. Well, I see we are wrapping up on time. Do y'all have anything you want to close out? Maybe what your I want to say your number one hope for the next session, but I always hate it when somebody tells me I have to have one. So your biggest hopes for the next session in 30 seconds or less.
Well, I just want to start with, our hope is to bring back leaders such as yourself that really fight for state employees. We're going to need as many allies as we possibly can have during the next session. And as we mentioned throughout this, there's a lot that's going to be discussed. We're going to need to find ways to really stretch the budget because the stuff that we talked about, the need for a pay raise, increase the pension, all that stuff hasn't gone away. That needs to be addressed next session as well. And we need fighters and state legislators that will be able to find a way to address the crisis, the economic crisis that COVID has caused, while still handling the needs of the state and not cutting the budgets for much needed services and laying off individuals that desperately need their jobs and taking care of retirees. So definitely urge everyone to get out there and volunteer for the candidates that are going to fight for our interests. Representative Zwiener, like she mentioned at the beginning, they're going to have phone banks about every day. So get involved, keep up to date on that. Jump out there in the campaign. We got just a few days, 20-something days left until election, and we're going to need as many allies as we can. That's my hope, is get allies in office.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler.
I think for us, really, it's going to come down to, our biggest hope is that we're able to actually preserve funding and avoid some serious cuts to public education going through the next session. But then also getting some real progress around safety issues and around privatization. I know those are things that you're going to hear that constant drumbeat coming from us all through the session. So get ready. We won't stop talking about it. But on top of that, I think that really, I'm just to be very transparent. My hope is that we come into this session with a new house that is flipped and kind of open in many ways to the needs that we have and what we are having to do in order to support our teachers and our students throughout this crisis, but also going forward into the future. And this is going to be, I hope everybody gets out there and they vote, because this election is really an opportunity to hold folks accountable and to get great people in place that are going to fight for what our causes are, and to fight to protect us and to support us, such as yourself, Representative Zwiener. This is what we need, and this is my hope, is that we have the folks in the Capitol who are willing and able to do the jobs that need to get done, even though they're going to be challenging, let us say.
Well, thank you both. I certainly hope to get back to the Texas Capitol to keep trying to work for what's best for all Texans. And thank y'all both for joining us. I want to say that what is good for our teachers, what is good for our public employees is also good for Texans. So really thank y'all so much for the folks y'all are advocating for every day. And with that, I'll make one more reminder to the audience. Please come out and vote. Early voting will start on October 13th. And if you'd like to help us get out the vote, we are going to do a lit drop blitz this weekend. Tomorrow, Saturday, we will be in Buda and San Marcos. Sunday, we will be in Kyle. And Monday, we will be in Dripping Springs. knocking on Tyler's parents' door, probably. Well, not knocking, lit dropping. We're doing contactless lit drops, everyone. So no super spreader incidents from this campaign. But we'd love for y'all to join us. If you want to drop a lit at Tyler's parents' door, come out on Monday to Dripping Springs. So thank y'all for joining us. Hope y'all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.